Hello. Welcome to Crash Course World History. Today, we'll be talking about some of my favorite people in history. Drum roll, please. Pirates.
Jordan, Mr. Vitale said we couldn't do pirates.
What do you mean?
He said we can't just do pirates.
Ashley, I'm doing pirates. You can't stop me. Welcome to Crash Course World History. Today, we'll be talking about pirates.
And Vikings!
And Polynesians.
And Indian Ocean Basin people!
Today, on Crash Course World History, we'll be talking about seafaring people. First up, the best people of all, the pirates. What originally comes to mind when a person thinks of traditional pirates are peg legs, eye patches, and dirty old alcoholics walking around, sailing around aimlessly on the open sea with no real ambitions. However, this is untrue, completely false. Oh wait, that's the wrong image. Much better, that's better. Now, while most were most definitely dirty and perhaps old, the image of pirates we get from media is unfortunately overdone in most cases. Pirates are a lot less extreme in their daily activities than it has originally been made out to be. Pirates were originally from the ancient Mediterranean and trade industries along ports in Anatolia. These pirates were sea peoples who threatened the Aegean and Mediterranean in the 14th century BC. These shorelines were unsuited for agriculture, and the people who remained there turned to fishing as a primary industry. However, this often didn't support them for long, and they turned to piracy. Pirates are defined as a person who attacks and robs ships at sea. Though pirates originated in the Mediterranean, they soon spread out through many parts of the world. A race of pirates called the Illyrians and the Tyrians were famous for their many raids and were often accompanied by the Greeks and the Romans. The Phoenicians were also known to commit acts of piracy in connection to the slave trade. With time, the pirates in the Mediterranean became more organized and formed companies derived from their ancient seafaring traditions. Speaking of the Greeks, during the Hellenistic period, there was a rise in piracy after the death of Alexander the Great. You know, that one dude that decided he could conquer anything he wanted without consequences. Yeah, that's him. Yeah, he died, and pirates no longer had as many limitations, so the activity of pirates increased. Now, maybe you're asking yourself, why do I need to care about sweaty men on ships attacking each other? But see, that's exactly why you should care about pirates. They had a heavy influence on history. For instance, in 75 BC, Julius Caesar was kidnapped for 38 days by Sicilian pirates and held in the Dodecanese islet of Formosa to the southwest of Anatolia. The Sicilian pirates originally are said to have demanded a ransom of 20 talents of gold, but this was raised to 50 talents on the word of Caesar himself, that he was worth at least 50, so that was his own fault. It was also said that the debt was eventually paid and Caesar was released. Unfortunately for the pirates, their fame from capturing Caesar didn't last long, as Caesar turned on the pirates, chased them down, and crucified them, so you win some and you lose some. Now, back to Rome. During the Roman period, there were multiple changes to the Mediterranean piracy. It began in 67 BC, when the ports of Ostia were not only attacked, but set on fire by pirates. Now, if that wasn't cool enough, these pirates were also able to kidnap 2 prominent senators. So, when thinking about pirates, you might want to get that unorganized crazed man swinging swords out of your head, because these guys knew how to get things done. They organized plans and were able to efficiently act them out, getting in and out and accomplishing their goal. Oh, it looks like it's time for the open letter. An open letter to Captain Jack Sparrow. Captain Jack Sparrow, right there. Captain Jack, your movies, Pirate of the Caribbean, have often sparked the debate on if Caribbean is pronounced Caribbean or Caribbean. Regardless, your movies open an interest of piracy within the hearts of many, including myself, which I regret to say has made me want to become a pirate. However, their accuracy is debatable. While your movie attempts to show the rough life at sea, including gruesome deaths and the hatred of the British which was forced upon you, it also shows an exciting, fast-paced life that was sadly untrue and honestly breaks my heart. In most cases, pirates sailed around the sea for years without confrontation and died at an early age from sun poisoning, scurvy, or the always fun lynching. Sea monsters are also unfortunately not a part of history and did not come up in their everyday life, which your movies also show incorrectly again. I'm very disappointed. If you had been a real pirate, I regret to inform you that you most likely would have died forgotten and shriveled up like a prune at a very young age. Keep singing about that jar of dirt you captured and never stop representing the advanced military raids a bunch of men with barely any teeth managed to pull off. Best wishes, Jordan Carr. However, of course, there were some exceptions to these lame deaths, as many pirates became quite famous and rode the high seas feared by all, creating the quite rich life for themselves. Let's go to the thought bubble.
Perhaps the most famous pirate of all time, Blackbeard. He demanded medicine from colonists in Virginia, maybe because he was a drug addict, maybe because he actually wanted medicine. The world may never know. He was stabbed 20 times, shot 5 times, and then died at the hands of the British Navy. How tragic.
Up next, the most fantastic people you'll ever hear about, the Indian Ocean Basin peoples.
False! It was the pirates.
When you think of India, you probably think of technology, overpopulation, belly dancing, and spices, which were some of the most spicy commodities traded in the 15th century. The use of dhows and sailboats helped create booming economic centers in the Indian Ocean Basin that countries all over Europe and Asia wanted to participate in. With the creation of these maritime technologies, the seafarers had to learn the patterns of the monsoons so they could lead successful missions and try not to end up lost in the middle of the Indian Ocean Basin. Along these trade routes were many goods transported, such as gold, spices. But some of the most important things exchanged were the religious beliefs of Jains and Muslims. Far before Europeans began trading in the Spice Islands, slowly ruining everything they touched, mace, cloves, pepper, and nutmeg were bought with Chinese silk, Indian cotton, African ivory, and Arabian coffee. The largest producers of these spices were the Malacca Islands. On land routes, these spices could have been sold in Europe for 1,000% more than they were worth, after being passed through the many hands of merchants on their way across the continent. They became very rich from this trade. Okay, let's talk Zheng He. Zheng He was a Muslim merchant from China that set sail for the Indian Ocean Basin in 1405. He was one of the first voyagers to navigate the basin, leading an armada of over 300 boats and 27,000 crew members. He didn't really care about finding territory in the Indian Ocean Basin though. He was all about the money. He focused on buying goods and selling them for higher prices in mainland Asia. He brought back rhinos, zebras, and even giraffes to China, which probably looked crazy when you think about a rhino riding around on boats and taking a vacation to the Great Wall of China with your trusty giraffe carrying all your bags by your side. Though China didn't need to participate in this trade, as they were completely self-sufficient at this time and only traded to gain prestige and respect. It was the center of the economic universe of the time and the leaders in maritime technology. On the other hand, the Portuguese didn't have access to many resources, so they had to trade. They decided to focus their trading in the Indian Ocean Basin since European desire for luxury Asian goods was great. Almost as great as our desire for an A in this class, but the Portuguese were actually successful. Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal commissioned sailors to find 2 things. 1, a path to the Indian Ocean trade to get in on the spice trade, and 2, to find the kingdom of Prester John, who may or may not have been a Christian king, and ask for his help in the Crusades. Vasco da Gama was the first of Prince Henry's employees to make it around the continent of Africa and into the magical Indian Ocean Basin. He set sail in 1497 and landed in Calcutta, a major trading port on India's west coast, in 1498, looking for gold and Christians. Portugal soon set up what the historians call the trading post empires on the coastal cities in the Indian Ocean Basin. The Portuguese merchants would capture any kind of ship and force them to buy a permit called the cartaz so they could trade in the towns Portugal controlled. At this point, the Portuguese were pretty much glorified pirates since they extracted value from trade without adding to its efficiency or volume. During this time, the Iberian Peninsula was crazy for trade, so Isabella Ferdinand of Spain commissioned Christopher Columbus to find a route to the Spice Islands in the Indian Ocean Basin. As we all know, he was unsuccessful in this feat, reaching the Caribbean instead of the East Indies. He used a technique called dead reckoning to figure out his location based on the direction he was going, his speed, and the time using an hourglass. So evidently, he wasn't a complete moron. He was just oblivious to the massive landform known as the Americas. Nevertheless, Columbus accidentally discovering the Americas brought catastrophic changes across the world, like new races, transportation of crops, and transportation of people, especially in the Americas and Europe, known as the Columbian Exchange, and the slave trade.
Up next, we have the Polynesians. You may know the Polynesians from Moana, which is actually a great representation of the Polynesian peoples, but what actually is Polynesia? Well, it is a triangular area of the east to central Pacific Ocean. It encompasses countless islands that the Polynesians discovered 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Some of these islands had very little resources, which resulted in the early Polynesians needing to voyage from one island to another in order to gain the resources they needed, like food, water, and people to sacrifice. The Polynesians frequently traded luxury goods with each other by traveling from island to island, accidentally becoming masters of maritime travel. They even voyaged all the way to Chile. Their ships were very advanced for their time and had navigational technologies specialized for long-distance travel that the Europeans would discover only a couple thousand years later. The Polynesians traveled so much that their culture and vocabulary became extremely similar across their islands. They all had similar names for fun technical terms like tools and plants. Along with this, the Polynesians were also organized into tribal societies, which were headed by chiefs and were pretty egalitarian. The Polynesians also had a strong interest in the supernatural and had many legends based off of natural phenomena. They obviously had strong ties to nature and had many gods modeled after the earth, sky, and water. They also practiced fun rituals such as human sacrifice. These humans were usually people who didn't comply to ritual behavior, or the usual female virgin. When the Polynesians were voyaging or performing religious rituals, they were probably engaging in war. Intertribal warfare was very common among the Polynesians, especially when they ran out of food. And even war in Polynesia took place in the ocean. Along with war, the Polynesians also engaged in other fun, violent acts like cannibalism. This usually was performed for ritual purposes or to consume your enemy. So, picture that next time you watch Moana. Also, if you're planning on visiting any Polynesian island soon, you might want to reconsider because some modern Polynesians sometimes eat visiting tourists. It actually wouldn't be too much of a stretch to compare the Polynesians to nomads in Eurasia, and by extension, the Mongols. You can compare them because they didn't settle in one place for their entire lives. They traveled to many different areas to gain resources, lived in an egalitarian hierarchy, and also had religion based on nature. So remember, the Polynesians were peoples with their own individual culture, and while it may be easy to rely on movies, it is important to gain accurate historical knowledge from reliable sources, so you can understand the Polynesians for who they actually were and are.
And last but not least, through our fantastical adventure through the world of seafaring people, we have the Vikings. Everybody knows who the Vikings are, right? What probably comes to mind is big jack dudes with long beards and helmets with big horns who sail in on their curvy little boats and rampage through villages. Or you think of the football team, whatever floats your boat. Get it? No? Yeah, funny. Surprisingly, the first description is actually pretty accurate. The Vikings were Scandinavians mainly, who raided and traded with societies around the Norwegian and Baltic seas. Vikings were basically Scandinavian pirates, considering the term Viking comes from the word Vikinger, which is Scandinavian for pirate. They had a reputation for being pretty savage and barbaric in their raids, and that reputation is rather justified. The Vikings were not afraid to cause a little trouble. They killed people and stole all their valuables. They would trade things that they had stolen with people in Eurasia, and they burned down villages and left inhabitants with nothing. They were the definition of pirates. You might be asking yourself, why did Vikings do all this? A common belief is that when Charlemagne used force to Christianize all ruling societies, the Vikings became angry and wanted revenge. Raiding in Europe had been around long before the Vikings. They just continued with the tradition. The tradition, of course, being angry men searching for power and money through any means necessary. That's a continuity if I've ever seen one.
Wink, wink.
The Vikings were famous for being seafaring people. They traveled mainly by water in their homemade little boats, and they sailed around the seas, stealing things from people and just living their lives. The Vikings had a very go big or go home attitude, and that's probably what attributed to their success.
Today, we're going to be talking about
Polynesians.
Queen Elizabeth had a pet name for fur. This dog has fur. Her Swiffer's in the way.
I was rolling. I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want.
Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. I want, really, really, really want
Zig-a-zig, ah.